Hi everyone, and welcome to our next installment of Self-Compassion Fridays. Again, my name is Emily Hamstra with Heartland Counseling, and last week we took a little bit of a diversion from what we normally do in reading our book, and we went on a little meditation retreat up the hill and kind of just observed our surroundings and allowed ourselves to just kind of breathe and be at peace. And practice mindfulness and compassion in that way. Today we're going to return to our book, Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. And we are on chapter 4, which is called We're All in This Together. The second fundamental element of self-compassion is recognition of the common human experience, acknowledgement of the interconnected nature of our lives, indeed of life itself, helps to distinguish self-compassion from mere self-acceptance or self-love. Although self-acceptance and self-love are important, they are incomplete by themselves. They leave out an essential factor, other people. Compassion is, by definition, relational. Compassion literally means to suffer with, which implies a basic mutuality in the experience of suffering. The emotion of compassion springs from the recognition that the human experience is imperfect. Why else would we say it's only human to comfort someone who has made a mistake? Self-compassion honors the fact that all human beings are fallible, that wrong choices and feelings of regret are inevitable, no matter how high and mighty one is. When we're in touch with our common humanity, we remember that feelings of inadequacy and disappointment are shared by all. This is what distinguishes self-compassion from self-pity. Whereas self-pity says, "Poor me," self-compassion remembers that everyone suffers, and it offers comfort because everyone is human. The pain I feel in difficult times is the same pain that you feel in difficult times. The triggers are different, the circumstances are different, the degree of pain is different, but the process is the same. You can't always get what you want. This is true for everyone, even the Rolling Stones. We often become scared and angry when we focus on undesired aspects of our lives. We feel helpless and frustrated by our inability to control things, to get what we want, to be who we want to be. We rail against things as they are, and we cling to our narrow vision of how things should be. Every single human is in the same boat. The beauty of recognizing this basic fact of life, the silver lining, so to speak, is that it provides deep insight into the shared human condition. The next section is called Isolated and Alone. Sadly, however, most people don't focus on what they have in common with others, especially when they feel ashamed or inadequate. Rather than framing their imperfection in light of the shared human experience, they're more likely to feel isolated and disconnected from the world around them when they fail. When we focus on our shortcomings without taking the bigger human picture into account, our perspective tends to narrow. We become absorbed by our own feelings of insufficiency and insecurity. When we're in the confined space of self-loathing, it's as if the rest of humanity doesn't even care. It says the rest of humanity doesn't even exist. Whoops. This isn't a logical thought process, but a type of emotional tunnel vision. Somehow it feels like I am the only one who's being dumped, proven wrong, or made a fool of. Feeling unworthy goes hand in hand with feeling separate from others, separate from life. If we are defective, how can we possibly belong? It seems like a vicious cycle. The more deficient we feel, the more separate and vulnerable we feel. And even when we're having a painful experience that is not our fault, perhaps we've been laid off from our job because of an economic downturn, for instance, we often irrationally feel that the rest of the world is happily employed while it's only me sitting at home watching reruns all day. Or when we become ill, it feels like sickness is an unusual, abnormal state. Once we fall into the trap of believing that things are supposed to go well, we tend to think something has gone terribly amiss when they suddenly don't. Again, this isn't a conscious thought process, but a hidden assumption that colors our emotional reactions. If we were to take a completely logical approach to the issue, we'd consider the fact that thousands of things can go wrong in life at any one time. So it's highly unlikely, in fact inevitable, that we'll experience hardships on a regular basis. But we don't tend to be rational about these matters. Instead, we suffer, and we all feel alone in our suffering. The need to belong is our next section. Abraham Maslow was a well-known American psychologist working in the mid-20th century who led the humanistic psychology movement. He argued that needs for individual growth and happiness can't be met without first satisfying the more basic need for human connection. Without bonds of love and affection with others, he argued, we cannot go on to achieve our full potential as human beings. Similarly, psychoanalyst Heinz Kohut, who developed a model called self-psychology, proposed that belongingness was one of the core needs of the human. He defined belongingness as the feeling of being human among humans, a feeling that allows us to feel connected to other people. One of the major causes of mental health problems, he felt, was a lack of belongingness, the perception that we are cut off from our fellows. Loneliness stems from the feeling that we don't belong, whether or not we're in the presence of others. If you attend a large party where you don't quite fit in, you're likely to still feel alone. Loneliness comes from feeling disconnected from others, even if they're only inches away. Public speaking anxiety, the number one phobia experienced in our culture, is also caused by fear of rejection and isolation. Why does the instruction to imagine your audience in their underwear work? Because it reminds you that the audience is vulnerable and imperfect too, and the image boasts your sense of shared humanity. Even the fear of death itself stems largely from apprehension about losing companionship, closeness, and relationships to others, and feelings of isolation can actually help make that fear a reality. Research indicates that social isolation increases the risk of coronary heart disease by 2 or 3 times. In contrast, involvement in a support group lessens anxiety and depression experienced by cancer victims, while increasing their long-term chances of survival. One of the key reasons support groups are so effective is because members feel less isolated throughout their ordeal. The need to belong, therefore, is fundamental to both physical and emotional health. Feelings of connectedness, like feelings of kindness, activate the brain's attachment system. The befriend part of tend and befriend instinct has to do with the human tendency to affiliate, to come together in groups in order to feel secure. For this reason, people who feel connected to others are not as frightened by difficult life circumstances and are more readily able to roll with the punches. Of course, it's wonderful when we can get our need to belong met by loved ones such as friends or family, but if you're someone who has trouble maintaining good relationships, this type of social support may be missing in your life. And even in the best of circumstances, other people aren't always able to make us feel that we belong and are accepted. In the cavernous halls of our own minds, we may feel isolated in any moment, even if this isn't the way things actually are. Our fears and self-judgment are like blinders that often prevent us from seeing the hands that are being held out to help us. We may also be ashamed to admit our feelings of inadequacy to those we love, for fear that they wouldn't love us anymore if they knew the way we really were. Hiding our true selves from others then makes us feel even more alone. That's why it's so important to transform our relationship with ourselves by recognizing our inherent interconnectedness. If we can compassionately remind ourselves in moments of falling down that failure is part of the shared human experience, then that moment becomes one of togetherness rather than isolation. When our troubled, painful experiences are framed by the recognition that countless others have undergone similar hardships, the blow is softened. The pain still hurts, but it doesn't become compounded by feelings of separation. Sadly, however, our culture tells us to notice how we are unique from others, not how we are the same. I got low battery mode. Okay, the comparison game is next. Because our culture demands that we perceive ourselves as special and above average, we routinely engage in an egoistic process of social comparison with others. When we're deeply invested in seeing ourselves positively, we tend to feel threatened if others do better than we do. One of the saddest consequences of social comparison is how we distance ourselves from people whose success makes us feel bad about ourselves. Interestingly, one study found this to be true both literally and figuratively. Researchers told study participants they were assessing student interest in and knowledge of various topics for an upcoming college bowl competition. Students thought they were being tested in pairs, but the other student was really part of the research team. A mock competition was held, and students fielded a series of questions about topics such as rock music or football. The experimenters told students either they had outperformed their partner or else their partner had outperformed them. Next, experimenters assessed how close participants felt to their study partner by asking how much they thought they had in common and how much they wanted to work with their partner in the future. They even looked at how physically close they sat to their partner when both were moved to another room. Students felt more distant from partners and also sat farther away from them when they were told that they had been outperformed. The sad irony is that the very reason we want to succeed in the first place is because we want to feel accepted and worthy, to be close to others, to feel that we belong. It's a classic catch-22. The very act of competing with others for success sets up an unwinnable situation in which the feelings of connectedness we crave are forever out of reach. All right, so now we're moving on to the illusion of perfection. All too often, however, our minds fool us into thinking that we can and in fact should be other than we are. Nobody likes to feel they're flawed, but for some, imperfection is especially hard to bear. Perfectionism is defined as the compulsive need to achieve and accomplish one's goals, with no allowance for falling short of one's ideals. Perfectionists experience enormous stress and anxiety about getting things exactly right, and they feel devastated when they don't. The unrealistically high expectation of perfectionists mean that they will inevitably be disappointed. By seeing things in black and white terms, either I'm perfect or I'm worthless, perfectionists are continually dissatisfied with themselves. Does perfectionism have an upside? The positive aspect of perfectionism has to do with the determination to do your best. To achieve and setting high standards for yourself can be a productive and healthy trait. But when your entire sense of self-worth is based on being productive and successful, when failure is simply not allowed, then the striving to achieve becomes tyrannical and counterproductive. Research indicates that perfectionists are at a much greater risk for eating disorders, anxiety, depression, and a whole host of other psychological problems. If we were perfect, we wouldn't be human. We'd be Barbie and Ken, plastic figurines that look good but are also dead as doorknobs. Warm, breathing human life is a constantly unfolding wonder, not a static state of flawless sameness. Being alive involves struggle and despair as well as joy and glory. To demand perfection is to turn our backs on real life, the full range of human experience, and perfection is boring. The popular YouTube character Kelly, an adolescent girl played by comedian Liam Kyle Sullivan, captures this sentiment perfectly when she says in a typically bored teen girl voice, "I've already been to heaven. After 5 minutes, I was like, let's go." Isn't it so true? Would you really want to inhabit a world where everything and everyone was absolutely perfect? It's precisely because of the unwanted and unexpected that our lives have such intrigue and interest. Imperfection also makes growth and learning possible. Like it or not, the main way we learn is by falling flat on our face, just as we did when we first learned to walk. Our parents may tell us 1,000,000 times not to touch that hot stove, but it's only after we actually burn ourselves that we really understand why it's not such a great idea. The learning opportunities provided by failure can actually help us to achieve our dreams. Failure is frustrating, but it's also temporary and eventually yields wisdom. We can think of failure as part of life's apprenticeship. If we were perfect and had all the answers, we'd never get to ask questions, and we wouldn't be able to discover anything new. So we're going to go to our exercise 1 for this section. It's called Letting Go of Our Definitions by Identifying Our Interconnectedness. And interconnectedness is that sense of interbeing. We are the expression of millions of prior circumstances that have all come together to shape us in the present moment. And it's our economic, social background, past associations and conversations, our culture, our family history, our genetics. They've all had a profound role in creating the person we are today. Many people can be scared to acknowledge their interconnectedness because it means they must admit they don't have complete control over how they think and act, and it can cause people to feel powerless. It can incite self-judgment and self-blame, but we aren't self-contained units either. Like weather patterns, we're also an impermanent, ever-changing phenomenon arising out of a particular set of interacting conditions. Without our genes, family, friends, social history, culture, we wouldn't act or feel as we do. When we recognize that we're the product of countless factors that we don't normally identify with, we don't need to take our personal failings so personally. When we acknowledge the intricate web of causes and conditions in which we're all embedded, we can be less judgmental of ourselves and others. A deep understanding of interbeing allows us to have compassion for the fact that we're doing the best we can given the hand life has dealt us. So think about a trait that you often judge yourself for, and that is an important part of your self-definition. For example, you may think of yourself as a shy person, lazy, angry, and so on. Then ask yourself the following questions. How often do you display this trait? Most of the time, sometimes, occasionally. Who are you when you don't display the trait? Are you still you? Are there particular circumstances? Oh, this is number 2. Are there particular circumstances that seem to draw out the trait and others in which the trait is not apparent? Does this trait really define you if particular circumstances must be present in order for the trait to emerge? What are the various causes and conditions that led to having the trait in the first place? Early family experiences, genetics, life pressures, etc. If these outside forces were partly responsible for you having this trait, is it accurate to think of the trait as reflecting the inner you? Number 4, did you choose to have this trait? And do you have much choice about whether or not you display this trait? If not, why are you judging yourself for this? Number 5, what happens when you reframe your self-description so that you are not defining yourself in terms of the trait? For example, instead of saying I'm an angry person, what happens when you say sometimes in certain circumstances I get angry? By not identifying so strongly with this trait, does anything change? Can you sense any more space, freedom, peace of mind? We're all subject to human limitations. Every single one of us is in the same predicament. The British novelist Jerome K. Jerome once wrote, "It is in our faults and failings, not in our virtues, that we touch each other and find sympathy. It is in our follies that we are one." In recognizing the shared nature of our imperfection, self-compassion provides the same sense of connectedness needed to truly thrive and reach our full potential. Instead of looking outside ourselves for a sense of acceptance and belonging, we can directly satisfy these needs by looking within. So thanks for joining me today. I hope you learned something new or learned something old that you were able to remember from hearing this. And I hope you give yourselves the chance to do the exercises. I know that my mind is buzzing with certain self-definitions and traits, that I would like to reflect on. Who am I when this isn't happening? Is this part of me, or is this part of the interconnectedness and the generations of my ancestors that have sort of brought me to this point? Was it a choice to have these traits or not? And how strongly am I using certain traits to define my life, and is that done in sort of a rigid way, or is there some flexibility and compassion there? So I'll definitely be delving into some of these exercises and some of these questions from today, and I hope you're able to do the same. So thank you for joining me, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye-bye.